Rome truly died in 476, why did its heart keep beating? Why did laws continue to be issued in its name? Why were taxes still collected? Why did generals still swear loyalty to a Roman emperor? Empires do not survive by memory. They survive by systems. And while the West fractured into kingdoms, one city remained intact. Not nostalgic, not symbolic, functional. That city was Constantinople. We are in the late 5th century. The Western imperial court is gone. Its territories are ruled by Gothic, Vandal, and Frankish elites. The old capital has lost its administrative spine, but the Eastern Empire is still operating. Its emperor governs from Constantinople. Its treasury functions. Its bureaucracy processes decisions. Its armies are paid. The question is not why the West collapsed. The question is why the East did not. Because what survived was not luck. It was design. And to understand that design, we need to look at how this new Rome was built to endure. Constantinople was not chosen for symbolism. It was chosen for position. It stood between two seas. The Black Sea to the north, the Mediterranean to the south. Whoever controlled the Bosporus controlled movement, of grain, of soldiers, of wealth. This was not a romantic capital built on memory. It was a logistical fortress. 3 sides of the city were protected by water, the 4th by walls, layers of stone, towers, and depth. An army could march toward Rome and besiege it from land. Constantinople required fleets, planning, resources, and time. Time was everything, because empires do not fall in a single battle. They fall when they cannot resupply. The Eastern Empire could: grain from Egypt, trade from Asia Minor, customs, duties from ships crossing its straits. Even when territories shifted, the arteries feeding the capital remained open. The West lost urban density, lost coordination, lost its administrative heartbeat. The East retained a center that could be defended, fed, and financed. That difference is not dramatic. It is structural, and structure determines survival. But geography alone does not preserve a state. Walls can delay collapse. They cannot prevent bankruptcy. To understand why the Eastern Empire endured, we have to look at what moved inside those walls. Walls buy time. Money buys survival. The Eastern Empire did not endure because it was braver. It endured because it could pay. An army without wages becomes a mob. A governor without funds becomes a rebel. A state without revenue becomes memory. The East still controlled dense, taxable regions. Egypt's grain, Syrian trade routes, urban centers that generated customs, tariffs, and coin. Taxation was not just extraction, it was circulation. Gold moved from province to capital, from capital to army, from army back into provincial markets. That circulation created predictability. Predictability creates loyalty. When soldiers are paid on time, they defend. When officials are paid on time, they administer. When merchants trust currency, they trade. The Western Empire, by contrast, increasingly relied on land grants instead of wages. Authority shifted from treasury to local magnates. That shift changed the nature of power. The East kept a monetary state, and a monetary state can project power beyond its borders. Because gold travels faster than legions, but money alone does not govern. Revenue must be recorded, calculated, enforced. Which means, behind every coin stood something less visible. A system of officers, scribes, and command. And that system did not collapse in 476. It remained intact. Money does not move itself. Orders do not enforce themselves. Behind the treasury stood something less visible, an administrative machine. The Eastern Empire retained a functioning bureaucracy, offices that processed petitions, departments that recorded land and tax obligations, chains of command that transmitted imperial decisions outward. This was not glamour, it was coordination. A governor received instructions. A clerk documented revenue. A military officer reported troop strength. Information flowed upward. Directives flowed downward. That flow created something rare in a collapsing world: continuity. When the Western court disintegrated, authority fragmented with it. Local leaders filled the vacuum. In the East, the center never vanished. An emperor could issue a law in Constantinople and expect it to be implemented in distant provinces. Not perfectly, but predictably. Predictability stabilizes expectation. Expectation stabilizes society. This is why the Eastern Empire did not simply survive. It remained governable. Governability is the difference between a kingdom and an empire. But structure alone does not explain everything. Because empires do not exist in isolation. They exist among rivals. And sometimes survival requires more than organization. It requires adaptation. Empires rarely defeat every threat. Sometimes they absorb it. The Eastern Empire did not try to eliminate every barbarian force on its borders. It negotiated. Tribal leaders were granted titles. Land was assigned in exchange for military service. Payments were structured not as surrender, but as contracts. These arrangements were not signs of weakness. They were instruments of control. A Gothic commander who held a Roman rank was no longer purely an outsider. He became invested in the imperial system. The state transformed enemies into stakeholders. This was not idealism. It was calculation. Instead of constant war on every frontier, the empire created layers of dependency. Titles conferred legitimacy. Legitimacy bound ambition. A warlord might command warriors, but a Roman title allowed him to command recognition. Recognition is a powerful currency. The Western Empire increasingly lost the ability to manage these relationships. Its center weakened. Local arrangements hardened into independent kingdoms. In the East, however, the imperial court still mediated power. It balanced factions. It redirected loyalty. It absorbed shock. This did not eliminate danger, but it slowed fragmentation. And in history, time is often the most decisive resource, because time allows a system to adjust. An adjustment is the difference between collapse and transformation. Power is not only enforced, it is recognized. Even as the Western court vanished, the word Roman did not lose its weight. To be Roman was not merely a matter of birthplace. It was a legal and political identity, a framework, a language of authority. Barbarian rulers in the West did not immediately discard it. They minted coins with imperial imagery. They sought titles from the Eastern emperor. They governed in the name of continuity, because Roman legitimacy still carried value. It signaled order. It signaled law. It signaled participation in a world larger than a tribe or a kingdom. In Constantinople, this identity remained institutional. The emperor was not a warlord elevated by victory. He was the Roman emperor. That distinction mattered. Titles shape expectation. Expectation shapes obedience. When a decree carried the authority of Rome, it traveled farther than an army could march. The Eastern Empire did not think of itself as Byzantine. That word did not exist for them. They were Romans, not heirs, not restorers, Romans. And that continuity of identity created psychological stability. A society that believes it still belongs to an empire behaves differently from one that believes it lives among ruins. But identity alone cannot preserve borders. Soon, the Eastern Empire would face pressures that tested whether belief and structure were enough. If Rome was a city, it fell. If Rome was a system, it moved. For centuries, authority had radiated from the old capital in Italy. But power does not depend on geography. It depends on coordination. When imperial decision-making shifted eastward, the symbolic center lagged behind the practical one. Rome remained sacred. But Constantinople became operational. Laws were drafted there. Taxes were calculated there. Diplomats negotiated there. The imperial court was no longer tied to the memory of marble forums. It was tied to functioning offices. This shift altered the meaning of Rome. Rome was no longer where emperors had once ruled. Rome was where orders were executed. That distinction mattered more than nostalgia, because empires survive through execution, not sentiment. When Western territories fragmented, they still claimed fragments of Roman heritage, but they did not control its machinery. Constantinople did, and machinery determines scale. A local king can command loyalty within borders. An empire coordinates across regions, across languages, across economies. By the late 5th century, the center of Roman gravity had fully relocated, not in name, but in function. This is why 476 feels decisive in textbooks, yet insignificant in the East. Because the administrative core had already migrated, and once migration becomes permanent, restoration becomes unnecessary. The empire had not lost its identity. It had changed its address, but address alone does not guarantee stability. What remained intact would soon be tested by ambition and by scale. By the early 6th century, the Eastern Empire was not merely surviving, it was stable, its capital was secure, its treasury functioned, its bureaucracy operated, its identity remained intact. Stability creates a dangerous illusion, the illusion that strength can be expanded. An empire that has survived crisis begins to imagine restoration. What if the lost provinces could be reclaimed? What if the Mediterranean could once again become a Roman sea? What if fragmentation in the West were only temporary? These were not fantasies born of desperation. They were calculations made possible by structure. Because when revenue flows, when armies are disciplined, when administration works, ambition becomes affordable. The Eastern Empire did not seek expansion out of chaos. It sought expansion from confidence. Confidence rooted in gold reserves, in fortified borders, in a functioning court. But expansion carries risk. Projection stretches supply lines. Campaigns drain treasuries. Victory creates new frontiers to defend. The more an empire expands, the more complex its coordination becomes. And complexity magnifies error. This is the moment where systems are tested. Not when they are weak, but when they feel strong. Because strength tempts scale, and scale amplifies consequences. In Constantinople, the machinery was ready. The question was whether the man who would soon command it understood the cost of turning defense into ambition. His name was Justinian. Justinian did not inherit a collapsing empire. He inherited a functioning one, and that distinction shaped everything. He believed Rome was not a memory, it was a mandate. The Western provinces were not foreign lands, they were territories temporarily mismanaged. In his vision, fragmentation was an anomaly. Order could be restored, law could be unified, authority could be reasserted. This was not nostalgia, it was systemic ambition. Justinian saw the machinery of Constantinople as a tool capable of rebuilding scale. He reorganized legal codes, he strengthened central authority, he invested in monumental architecture. The empire did not merely govern, it projected permanence. But projection is expensive. Campaigns against the Vandals in North Africa, wars in Italy against the Ostrogoths, conflicts with Persia in the east. Each victory expanded prestige. Each victory extended supply lines. Gold flowed outward. Armies stretched thinner. Administration grew more complex. A system designed for stability was now asked to sustain restoration. And restoration multiplies pressure. The treasury could finance campaigns. But prolonged war transforms gold into debt. The bureaucracy could coordinate provinces. But distant reconquests strain communication. The question was no longer whether the empire could act. It was whether it could absorb the cost of action. Justinian was not reckless. He was rational within his framework. If Rome had survived, why should it not reclaim what was once its own? The answer would not come from ideology. It would come from scale. Because scale reveals limits, and limits reveal the true resilience of a system. Expansion is often mistaken for strength, but expansion is exposure. When an empire grows, it multiplies responsibility. New provinces require governors. New frontiers require garrisons. New subjects require administration. Scale increases complexity, and complexity increases fragility. A system designed for cohesion must suddenly manage distance. Distance stretches communication. Distance delays response. Distance magnifies miscalculation. Every victory adds territory. Every territory adds cost. The Eastern Empire had survived by maintaining coordination. Now it was testing how far that coordination could reach. North Africa required fleets and supply chains across open sea. Italy required prolonged campaigns against entrenched powers. The eastern frontier demanded constant vigilance against Persia. Simultaneous pressure is the real measure of resilience, not isolated success. Because resilience is not proven in one theatre of war. It is proven when multiple fronts demand attention at once. Justinian's ambition was not irrational. It was logical within a functioning system. If the machinery works, expand its output. But machinery wears down under sustained strain. Officials make errors. Generals overextend. Treasuries thin. And when strain accumulates quietly, its effects are not immediate. They surface later, often suddenly. Empires rarely collapse the moment they overreach. They weaken first. They absorb pressure. They appear stable, until an external shock exposes how much tension was already present. By the mid-6th century, the Eastern Empire had proven it could act. The question was whether it could endure the consequences of action. Because survival is not the same as invulnerability, and success can be the beginning of vulnerability. After 476, the Western world did not become empty. It became decentralized. Gothic kings ruled Italy. Vandals governed North Africa. Franks expanded across Gaul. Cities still stood. Laws were still invoked. Roman names were still spoken, but coordination dissolved. Power no longer radiated from a single court. It was negotiated locally, between landholders, bishops, and military elites. Tax systems weakened. Coin circulation shrank. Urban density declined. Authority followed land. And land favors proximity. A king could command loyalty within his territory. He could defend borders near him. But he could not redirect grain from one region to stabilize another. He could not shift gold across seas to reinforce a distant frontier. He could not synchronize response at imperial scale. Roman identity survived in language. Roman imagery survived on coinage. Roman law survived in fragments. But fragments do not function as a machine. Without a central treasury, without integrated administration, without long-distance fiscal coordination, scale collapses quietly. The West did not reject Rome. It inherited pieces of it. Pieces strong enough to rule locally. Pieces too isolated to rule collectively. And once the coordinating center disappears, unity becomes memory. The name survives. The system does not. While the West ruled in fragments, the East ruled in layers. In Constantinople, authority did not depend on proximity. It depended on structure. Taxes flowed into a central treasury. Orders flowed outward through offices. Armies were paid from coordinated revenue. Distance did not eliminate control. It required management. The emperor did not govern a single territory. He governed a network. Provinces were not isolated holdings. They were components of a larger design. Grain from Egypt could support the capital. Gold from trade could finance campaigns. Legal decrees could standardize expectation across regions. The machinery connected regions to center, and the center redistributed stability. When one frontier weakened, resources could shift. When one region faltered, another could compensate. This is what scale looks like. Not size. Integration. The Eastern Empire was not stronger because it was richer. It was stronger because it was synchronized. Synchronization transforms territory into system, and systems survive longer than kingdoms. By the 6th century, two worlds coexisted. In the West, Rome had become heritage. In the East, Rome remained infrastructure. One preserved memory, the other preserved coordination. That difference would shape the fate of the Mediterranean for centuries. But even infrastructure can be strained, and strain accumulates quietly. By the middle of the 6th century, the Eastern Empire appeared secure. Its capital stood unbreached. Its treasury funded ambition. Its armies projected power across sea and land. It had survived collapse. It had reclaimed territory. It had restored the language of Roman authority. But survival and stability are not the same, and restoration magnifies strain. The system still functioned. The question was how much pressure it could absorb before function turned into fracture. Because empires rarely fall when they are weakest. They fall when they believe they are strongest. In the next episode, we will see what happens when confidence meets consequence.